I sat down at the kitchen table, barely awake when she placed a plate in front of me. She leaned over. Honey, you really need to brush your teeth before you eat your morning breath, she said. Her smile still lit up the room. Someone drained all my fluids and all my energy last night, I said. You should be used to it by now, she said. But we could stop this and watch TV or something. After all, we've been doing this for a year. It was clear from the look on her face that that was the last thing she wanted to do. Let's take the day off, she said. We have to go to work, I said. We have more than enough money, she persisted. We both have cars, we have this nice house, and we have plenty of food. Let's take a day off. If we take too many days off, we won't have jobs, cars, food, or a house, I said. Okay, Jason, but right after work we'll get busy, she said. Honey, have you forgotten what day it is? I asked. We have to go to church after work. Her eyes opened wider, and she looked at the calendar. I almost forgot, she said. You're making me as sick as you are. We'll have to go and check after church, you know. She never unclenched her hands but looked away. I know it's not my job anymore, but I have to check, she said. Just in case. I smiled at her and nodded. We're going to have to check things out real quick so we can get home and… she started. I shook my head and laughed. Well, you know we can't do anything tomorrow. It's a holy day, she said. I told her to get to work and walked out the door. I walked up the stairs and headed to the bathroom. I needed to shower before going to work. But I had to admit that I loved her. I loved her far more than any person I'd ever known. On some level, I felt like we would always be together. I had never felt that way about any person before. An hour later, I was sitting at my desk waiting for the last of my designs to be rendered. My company insisted on using an older version of NX. And to top it off, our computers were so slow that even in mundane tasks like getting emails, they lagged far behind my iPhone 5 and the original iPad. It was really stupid. At any given time, I could hear a chirp announcing that I had received an email on my iPhone. 2 or 3 seconds later, I would get a reply chirp on the iPad. The iPhone received mail faster because it was on a 4G LTE network. My iPad only worked on 3G. The worst part was that my office computer, which should have been much faster than either of the mobile networks, was much slower than either of them. Sometimes it took more than 2 minutes for the same email to appear on the computer. At lunchtime, she called me. Can you come out for a minute? She asked. I love you, but you'll have to call one of your men, I said. I'm a little tied up. I want to finish this part so I can stay home tomorrow and not do it with my woman. There will probably be a lot of praying and no sex. Okay, she said. I'll call one of the others. She hung up, and I was pissed. Less than a second later, my phone rang again. Jason, can you take a long day off from work so we can have a quick fun night out? She asked, laughing. My steady man is unavailable. Oh, so you're trying to make me jealous, huh? I asked. A laugh was her only answer. I'm only working until 2 today, she said. Can I come over and watch you work? I don't know, I started. Last time I let you watch me work and we almost ended up in the closet. I'll be really good this time, she promised. I'll see you in a couple hours, she said. I could have sworn I heard the sound of someone else's kisses as she hung up, as if I wasn't already distracted. I've had a hard life over the past year. It's not easy to have the most gorgeous woman you know in love with you, but someone had to do it. So it might as well have been me. My life wasn't always like this. Almost immediately, the phone on my desk rang. It was building security. Jason, I hate to break the bad news, the voice on the other end said. But you have a visitor. It's her, and there's a guy with her. He's older. I'll meet them in the cafeteria, I said. Good luck, he said, and hung up. I saved my drawing in case we had a power outage or something stupid happened while I was away from my desk. I walked down the stairs and then crossed the building to get to the cafeteria. Hey, Jason, there's some woman waiting for you in the cafeteria, George Steele said. George was a quality control engineer and had an incurably cheerful disposition. He also talked to every person he met and smiled too much. She's not a lady, George, I brushed him off. She's my wife. He burst into laughter and then looked at me strangely. But I thought that hot woman you always… he muttered. Exactly, I said, and walked away, leaving him standing there, not realizing if I was joking or not. I liked leaving people confused. When they said something curious or just plain stupid, if you said exactly, it made them think they were right about something, and also feel stupid if they still didn't get it since you hinted that they did. Most of them, even the most curious ones, will just walk away at that point. I walked into the cafeteria and waved to a few of my coworkers. I walked over and sat down at a vacant table in the far corner of the room. "Hi, Jason," said the woman sitting there. I was hoping the man with her would turn out to be a lawyer, but it was her father. "Hi, Pete," I said, extending my hand to the older man. He shook my hand warmly and the celebration began. "Jason, I know you heard your wife talking to you," he said. "It hurts her when you ignore her." "Pete, I heard your daughter talking to me," I said. "I no longer recognize her as my wife. She refuses to recognize my wishes and hides behind archaic rules that have nothing to do with modernity." "That's because you and I have different desires," Terry hissed. "In fact, our desires are completely opposite. You want us to get divorced. I want us to stay married." "We haven't been married for almost a year," I said. "Get that into your stupid head. It's over between us. In fact, there's no need to end it. I'm happy with my life the way it is now. I didn't ask for things to be the way they are. I don't think I could have even dreamed of things being the way they are now, but I'll accept it." "Jason, you know we're Catholic," Pete said. "We don't practice divorce. We believe that when two people make a commitment to be together forever, it's binding." "That's a load of crap, Pete," I snapped back. "The Catholic Church has some pretty archaic rules. They won't give us a divorce, but if we get a civil divorce, they'll grant us an annulment. And the annulment is already pierced. Since we have a special case, a cardinal came from Rome and stamped the annulment. All we have left to do is get a civil divorce. Normally, a civil divorce is first, but like I said, we have a special case." Pete looked at me, then at his daughter. Terry took her eyes off her father. "Is that true, honey?" he asked. "Daddy, I love him," she said, ignoring his question. "We just need to talk. We can work things out. We can still be happy." "Terry, honey, you're not telling me the truth," Pete said. "What's going on here?" "Daddy, I just want him back," Terry whimpered. Her father realized for the first time that all was not as it seemed. "I guess I've known for a long time that things are kind of weird around here," Pete said. "The damn bishop keeps asking me about Jason, and Jason isn't even Catholic. Neither he nor the priest ever asks me about you anymore, Terry. They don't even ask why you don't go to Mass anymore. So what happened last year?" "I'll tell you later, Dad," she said. "I'll tell you now," I said. "She'll probably keep lying to you." "Jason, don't," she said. "Are you going to give me a divorce?" I asked. "Never," she said. "Pete, about a year ago, a few weeks before Halloween, I was really happy. I was married to the woman I loved, and I thought she felt the same way," I began. "I felt the same way," Terry snapped back. "And I still do. You're just not giving me a chance." Like many young couples, we worked too hard, but I felt nothing but love and trust for Terry, I said. "I feel so stupid now, because I built my whole world around her. The sun rose and set over my wife. I had no idea. Anyway, we lived in a nice apartment, but we were saving up for a house. We didn't want to have kids until we had our own place. We also wanted the kids to have plenty of room to grow up in. I guess in a way that's what started it. We both work a lot, and we have slightly different schedules, so we were under a lot of stress. So when Terry started seeing girls at her job a couple times a week, I thought it was a great idea. After the first few times she did it, things really picked up between us. And heck, we were only married for 3 years. I never suspected a thing. One of the benefits of her girls' nights out was that we seemed to be doing it a lot more often, so I didn't mind. One Saturday, I was doing some light house cleaning and accidentally knocked Terry's purse off the table. All her stuff spilled out, and as I was putting it back in my purse, I discovered a half-empty pack of condoms. Terry, being a good Catholic girl, wasn't supposed to be on the pill, and we really didn't use condoms, so I got really angry. I started watching her more. I didn't say anything because, well, like I said, I loved her so much I thought I would die without her. I really didn't want to start anything or accuse her of anything without proof. Remember when I took the bag of marijuana from my little brother, and Terry found it in my jacket? She assumed I was some kind of drug addict, and didn't believe me when I said I was only trying to prevent my brother from becoming a drug addict. I was hoping the condoms in Terry's purse were something like that. So, not to worry, I followed her to her bachelorette party. The first time I followed her went without much incident. She and a few of her friends from work went to a bar and spent a lot of time drinking and acting silly. I noticed that she looked at her watch a lot, like she needed to go somewhere else. After a couple hours, she got up, hugged all her friends, and left the bar. I quickly ran down the alleys to get to my car and catch up to her house. Luckily, she was walking pretty slowly. She parked right in front of the bar and I parked a block away. But there wasn't really any competition. I took the back roads and got to the highway before she did. Her Impala is a nice car, but it was no match for my Boss 302. Even though it cost less than a Shelby GT 500, I truly believe the race-inspired Boss is a better Mustang. As soon as I hit the freeway, I hit 100 in no time and was pulling away from Terry more and more with each passing second. About 2 miles from our house was an overpass where the local police like to put the adjuster's car. There I slowed down to 65 miles per hour until I saw that no one was there. For the last mile and a half, I drove at 140. I could have cooked a hot dog on the heat coming from my ceramic brake pads when I pulled into my driveway. I quickly ran into the house, took off my shirt and pants, and changed into sweatpants. I took my sword off the wall and went out on the deck. Just as I started to do my exercises, I heard the sound of Terry's car in the driveway. A few minutes later, I heard her trotting around the house looking for me. Finally, she came out on the deck. My sword was like a blur, as I pretended to be so engrossed in my occupation that I didn't hear her. "I just don't understand why you're doing this," she said, smiling. "But I have to admit, I like the result." "It's too cold for you to be out here without a shirt, honey," she said. "Let's go inside, and I'll show you how much I've missed you." Normally, I would have pulled her into the house and let her show her, but that night I excused myself. Something was still bothering me. Although I really didn't catch her doing anything, something told me something was going on. Terry had been having some strange mood swings lately. For about a week, everything seemed normal. Terry was not at all the woman I married. Her mood swings seemed to disappear. She certainly didn't act like a woman who gets it elsewhere. But this persistent itch in the back of my mind was alarming. For about a week, I watched her during lunch. Terry and a few of her female co-workers went to lunch at a different place every day. They went to the most boring places. It was like following a group of teenagers. One day they'd go to McDonald's, another day they'd go to Wendy's, then Burger King, then Taco Hell, and end the week at KFC. Not surprisingly, Terry's butt started to sprawl. If she kept eating like that, she'd weigh 300 pounds by the time she was 30. All I accomplished by watching her at lunchtime was that I missed my own lunches for a week. Still, I was sure something was going on. When Terry's girls' night out came around again, I found myself following her again. She went to the same bar, and it was as crowded as it always was. Terry and her girlfriends were acting just as silly. I watched Terry as the women at her table came and went. Several of the women got up to dance and came back, but Terry didn't. A couple of them got up and went somewhere else, presumably the ladies' room. Watching the bar, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement on the roof behind and to the side of me. I turned my head and caught a glimpse of something or someone up there. Whoever or whatever it was hid behind a ledge on the roof. I turned back to the bar and noticed something had changed at Terry's table. I counted the women and noticed one was missing. It wasn't Terry, so I didn't worry too much. It just didn't seem important. A few minutes later, I noticed Terry's friend Crystal crossing the street and entering the parking lot. I hid behind a car and watched her. Crystal was walking with a guy, and they headed toward her car. I had never seen this guy before, but I knew it wasn't Crystal's husband, Ed. Ed is a freaking loader and a freaking giant. Ed would tear this guy in two without straining. Chris and the guy got in her car, but not in the front seat. They both got in the back seat. I snuck up to the car and looked inside. I pulled out my iPhone and started videotaping them. Thanks to the streetlight illuminating the car, I got a clear video of Crystal's head bobbing up and down on the guy's dipstick. I wanted to make sure they realized the deed was done and make sure neither of them got to enjoy themselves. I knocked on the window and took a couple shots of their surprised faces as they looked at me. The car door opened and a guy got out with Crystal. "What the hell are you doing, buddy?" the one with her asked. "I know you, don't I?" said I. "You work in the same office as Crystal and Terry. I don't know your name, but you're not married? I remember you from the company picnic." "Jason, what are you doing?" Crystal asked. "Screw what I'm doing, Crystal," I spat. "I was just driving past the parking lot on my way home when I saw you and that jerk, holding hands, walking to your car. He didn't look like Ed, so I thought you might be in trouble. I thought I'd come over and talk to you just in case you needed help. But obviously it was Ed who needed help." "Why does Eddie need help?" Crystal asked. Her voice was barely audible. "Well, he's going to need a good divorce lawyer," I said. Her eyes got as big as saucers. "He's going to need proof, and he can use the video I just took and the pictures. He can also use them to identify your friend." I looked at the man as I continued to speak. "You remember her husband Ed, don't you, buddy?" I smirked. He's almost 7 feet tall and almost 300 pounds, solid muscle. And he's madly in love with that cheating whore. I don't think there'll be much left of you when he gets his hands on you. They'll probably have to soak whatever he leaves behind in dishes to get enough DNA for identification. And of course, while you're in the hospital, they'll have to notify your wife. That's when he came at me. The blow was laughable. I blocked it and grabbed his arm. I put my hand into his elbow and then bent his arm back. I clamped him in a very painful elbow grip that I learned as a teenager at the Tian Shan Pai Gung Fu camp in the mountains of West Virginia. When I clutched him, he fell to his knees. I saw tears appear in the corners of his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "You're damn right sorry," I hissed. "I hate cheaters. But you'll be a lot more sorry when it's over. After Ed kicks your ass, I'm going to tell your wife about it, if she doesn't find out about it some other way." "Hey, I'll pay you," he said. "As much as you want. My wife doesn't need to know about this. That whore isn't worth my marriage. I just come here sometimes to blow off steam. This is the first time I've ever done it, and I swear it's the last time. I'll write you a check for, $3,000. I know you think I'm trying to cheat you, but I don't have a lot of cash on me. You cash the check, and after you cash it, you destroy the pictures. If the check turns out to be bad, you can just use them. I swear the check will be good." I said. "My iPhone 5 cost $300 with a 2-year contract. The price you put on those pictures and videos is $3,000. To break up the marriage of 2 scumbag cheaters so 2 good people can move on with their lives is priceless. I want to get something, but you're not buying it with MasterCard." I let go of his hand and told him to give me his driver's license. He started shaking his hand to restore circulation to it. He gently handed me his license, and I took a picture of it with my phone. He looked at me frantically. "This is so I can contact you, or your wife if I need to," I said sourly. "But what am I supposed to do?" he asked. "Pray that Crystal does what I ask her to do," I grinned. He ran back to the bar and then remembered he'd parked in the very parking lot he'd just escaped from. He looked back at me uncertainly. "Can I take my car?" he asked in a shaky voice. "Get out of here," I told him. "Jason, you have to understand. I love Ed," Crystal whined. "This isn't about love. I want to spend the rest of my life with Ed. This is just a fun and steamy graduation. I swear I'll never do it again." "Why, Chris?" I asked caustically. "Are you thinking about how much you'll hurt Ed? Or how much you'll hurt that little bitch who just ran out of here calling you a whore and telling you you're worthless? That guy ran away, leaving you here, and he doesn't care what happens to you. Big Ed would die for you." "You think I don't know that?" she shouted. "I feel the same way about him, damn it. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. It was just supposed to be fun until I got rid of him, that's all. I have no intention of leaving ED for anyone or anything." "And let me guess that's kind of like 50 Shades of Stupid, right?" I asked. She looked at me like she was trying to think of something to say. "No, Jason, this is more about you than anything else," she hissed. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Terry get up. It looked like she was going to leave. "Crystal, you and I are having lunch tomorrow. Be at the park near your work at noon, and be prepared to answer any questions I have for you. And be prepared to answer them honestly. If you lie, your marriage is over." She just looked at me and nodded. "Don't tell anyone I caught you. Not one goddamn soul. Do you understand?" hissed I. She nodded her head quickly, and I left before Terry left the bar. As I drove out of the parking lot, I was sure I saw a hooded figure curled up in the darkness on the roof next to the parking lot. I figured it was a security guard. I had to make another of my super fast trips home, but at least this time the bar visit was worth it. By the next afternoon, I'd have all the information I needed, or at least a better idea of what was going on with Terry. Crystal must have known I was serious because she was waiting for me when I got to the park the next day. She looked nervous. She came over and got in my car as soon as I pulled up. "Do you want to do it here or go to a motel?" she asked. "Do what?" I asked. "You know, get busy," she said, looking around like she was looking for a camera. "Are you crazy? Or are you just such a big slut?" I shouted. "I'm not a whore. I've never cheated on Terry, not once, and I never will. Why do cheaters always assume everyone else is doing it?" "I'm sorry," she whimpered. "It's just that when you turned down the money Nick offered you and said our marriage depended on something I had to do, I just assumed—" "You think too highly of yourself," I snapped back. "I don't need you. All I need are answers and the truth. I'll be checking other sources, and if you're lying to me, I'll pay Ed a visit." As soon as I mentioned Ed, she cringed against the soft leather of my seat as if he were watching her. I'll tell you everything you want to know, she said. You started having bachelorette parties a couple months ago. Was cheating the main reason you started doing it? No, she said. Of course it wasn't. We started getting together after successfully completing a very stressful job and decided that we all deserve to relax and celebrate. The execution of any complex operation tends to form a bond between members of a staff or team. We are all different. Some of us are married. Some of us are divorced, and some of us are single. We are all different ages. The only thing we have in common is that we work together. You said I had something to do with your cheating. Explain what you meant, I told her. Jason, I didn't mean it, she said. It's just that Terry loves you so much that she brags about you all the time. She talks about your muscles and swords and training. But she also talks about how we've all seen you show up and bring her flowers for no goddamn reason other than you're thinking about her. I wanted to find a man like that and play with him, if only for a short time. I mean, I love Ed more than life, but in bed he's what? Said I. Men? You guys are so hung up on size, she said. Then why do so many women leave their husbands for richer men? I asked. Because they're stupid. Do all the women in your little group cheat? I asked. Hell no, she replied. Most married women won't even think about it. And sure, single women are free to do whatever they want, but most of them don't go after married guys either. She was looking at me like she sensed what was coming next and was preparing for it. Terry's cheating on me? I asked. Then she turned her back on me. I know it was hard for her, but she had a choice to make, and I think she knew from the beginning where this conversation would lead. It was her friendship with Terry versus her marriage. Yes, she said, but only a couple times with a few guys. Well, with the old man, 3. But Jason, you have to understand, it's not what you think. At least not with the first 2 guys. Get the hell out of my car, I growled. I was having a hard time holding myself together, and I didn't want this slut to see me cry. No, she said. You have to let me explain. Say what you have to say and then get the hell out of my car, I snapped back. Jason, Terry loves you. She's willing to die for you. But women are hard to understand. You two have what most people would consider a perfect marriage, but women want variety. I give her variety, I snapped back. Yes, you do, she said. In some ways. But other than that, you're just like Ed. I looked at her like she was talking gibberish, I said. Jason, I've heard all those stories, she said. I know what you two have been up to, and it's just disgusting. I don't think that's a reason to end the relationship, she said. The biggest problem is you, honey. This girl thinks you've got the sun, stars, and moon hanging over you. She's sure you'll just get sick of her one day. She sees herself getting older, and she's sure you'll go for one of those young women in your office. Everything you do in bed is something you made up yourself. She wants to experiment a little to bring something new into your life. She wants to be mysterious and creative for you as well. If she screws your brains out, you won't walk away from her. One last thing, Jason, she's already realized that part of what she was looking for was just stupid. She slept with a few guys before you, but her experience was pretty limited. She just wanted to try another guy to see if what you two have is really as special as she thinks it is. After she tried 2 guys who she said were just awful compared to you, I think she figured it out and was ready to quit until she met an older guy. Met, I snapped back. Huh? She said. You said that what Terry and I have is something special. You should have said what Terry and I had. Past tense, I said. Jason, you've got to be kidding me, she snapped back. That girl can't live without you. What she did was damn bad, but it's not worth losing your marriage over it. Did you know that almost 50% of married people cheat at one point or another? In most cases, they never find out, and their marriage goes on without incident. In those cases, where they do find out, if the cheating was brief, most people with common sense forgive their spouses, and it never happens again. The cheating spouse is usually much more aware of what they risk losing and never even thinks about doing it again. You and Terry are perfect for each other. Don't dismiss this. Do you really know anyone who will make you happier than her? Before you try to shove all that Dr. Phil crap down my throat, have you ever heard the expression, once a cheater, always a cheater? I asked. Tell me about this old man, as you call him, I said. Well, he's not that old, she began. He's just older than we are. He's very hard to describe, but you don't have to worry about him. He hasn't shown up in over 2 weeks. He just comes when he comes, and Terry leaves with him. He doesn't even come to our table. He just shows up at the door or outside, and Terry gets up and goes to him. But you don't have to worry about him. I don't think that's what they're doing. Then what do they do? I asked. Hell, Terry doesn't remember, she said. When she comes back, she's always weak and lethargic and doesn't remember leaving. It's like he's hypnotizing her or something. We know they don't do that. Here's my phone number, I told her. I'll keep an eye on her. I need evidence to help me in my divorce. No, Jason, she sighed. You have to give her a chance. Shut up, slut, I hissed. Do you want to see the end of one marriage or three? She's been quiet. Crystal, you did your duty to Terry as a friend. You tried to stand up for her. You tried to protect her, but you have to take care of yourself. Be true to yourself and all that other shit. All I need you to do is call me if he shows up. If you know, I could already be there. But if you don't, I'll still file for divorce. The difference is, you'll go down with me. If you help me, I swear Ed won't hear from me about what you did. I also won't show him the video or the pictures. Do we have a deal? Yes, she replied coldly. Not that I have a choice, do I? But Jason, I have to tell you one thing. Nobody's perfect. Look at yourself. You have a temper. You judge people, and you enjoyed hurting Nick yesterday when he tried to hit you. You also don't seem to know how to forgive people. Terry made a mistake, and a big one. But she really loves you. And the tears in the corners of your eyes that you try so hard to hide tell me that you love her too. Are you cutting off your nose to spite your face? What the hell am I supposed to do? Slap her on her ass and tell her not to do it again? Maybe I'm being too harsh, Crystal, but I have such a thing as self-respect. If I let her go, I'll never be able to look myself in the face again. Hell yeah, you said it yourself. I love Terry, I always have. But not enough to let her shit on me. But shitting on each other isn't something I'm interested in. I'm never going back to that place, she said. From now on, that girl will only spend her evenings with her husband. To hell with that, I said. You have to keep going until I get proof. Then you can leave. If you tell Terry what's going on or do anything else to thwart my efforts, I'll not only send Ed the video, but I'll put it on the internet. Did I get that right? What's my name? She asked. I almost laughed when I said Crystal. Later that day when I got home, Terry was all over me. I could barely look at her. Luckily, she sensed something was wrong with me and asked me about it. Jason, are you okay? She asked. No, I'm not okay, I snapped back. My words and tone were harsher than I wanted, and I didn't want to give anything away until it was time. I haven't been feeling well lately, I said, and I got some very bad news today. Her face softened and she smiled and hugged me. It's going to be okay. Honey, she said, you still have me. Tell me about everything. Maybe we should spend tonight in bed together. We'll just snuggle up against each other with some popcorn and a good movie. And when we start rubbing against each other, who knows what might happen? I need to work out, I said, turning away from her. Jason, you shouldn't go out for a run if you're sick, she said. And certainly the other two musketeers can handle it if you don't pick up a sword for at least one night. I just stepped away from her. As I left the room, I could hear her yelling after me. If you have so much energy, maybe you should channel it into having fun with your wife. We haven't had one in 2 weeks, she yelled. I changed into my gym uniform and went for a jog. One of the reasons I chose the neighborhood we lived in was because it was very close to a park and a great school. The park had trails to run on, and the middle school, even though we didn't have kids yet, had a track for cross-country practice. From the looks of it, we probably wouldn't have kids to worry about now. I highly doubted my marriage would last a month. And the only reason I didn't meet with her that day was because I needed leverage for a divorce. It is very strange that in the greatest country on earth, a country that prides itself on truth and justice for all, we don't know how to get a fair divorce. Divorce in this country is all about women and sex. If a woman cheats on her husband, even if he didn't get any, he's on the losing end. He ends up losing at least half of their assets, even though he did nothing wrong. The victim becomes an even bigger victim. On the other hand, if it's a guy who's entertaining himself, he gets double. He entertains his secretary or whatever, and then he gets entertained by the court system. If I went to court with a bunch of he said, she said, and my gut feeling that Terry was cheating on me, I'd lose big time. Even if I had come to court with a statement from Crystal proving it, that wouldn't have been considered compelling evidence either. I wished with all my heart that Terry was the one I'd caught in that car. Then this whole mess could have been over by now. Running along the paths in the park, I tried to think about my next steps and how I wanted my life to turn out. I returned home and picked up the sword I usually practiced with. Terry was right about one thing. It was too damn cold outside for me to go outside without a shirt. Even after a run, which usually puts me in a calm mood, I was still worked up. I decided to just work on my forms. In Japanese styles, they're called kata. In Chinese styles, they are called sets. They are groups of movements that mimic real combat to hone a set of skills. The kata I worked on were developed by my Kenjutsu sensei. He was very modern in his training and stole from everywhere. He always told me that if you steal from one source, it's plagiarism, but if you steal from many, it's research. So when he developed katana for katana, he incorporated several different styles of Japanese swordsmanship, as well as some Chinese sword skills, some Korean sword movements, and even some lunges and strikes that he took from European swordsmanship. When I immersed myself in the movements, all my problems seemed to melt away. I was jumping, slashing, throwing punches. I parried, ducked, and dodged, and in the end, I won. Not one of the imaginary bastards I killed got up, and not one of them was able to point their blade at me. In my imagination, each of those imaginary bastards looked like the faceless old bastard who had entertained my wife and ruined my marriage. I honestly didn't believe a word of the nonsense Crystal was telling me. What kind of fool did she think I was? All that nonsense about Terry not having fun with this old man made absolutely no sense. But it didn't matter because she was helping me whether she wanted to or not. And the other thing was that even though she was probably lying to me, I kept my word to Crystal, but I was sure she'd get hers in the end. Cheaters always cheat. When I finished my exercises, I noticed Terry standing there. "I never tire of watching you do it," she said. "I always imagine us going back in time, me wearing one of those beautiful hoop dresses, and you fighting for my honor." I had to bite my lip to keep from giving away my first thought. "What?" I blurted out. And she smiled, thinking she'd surprised me. I wanted to ask her what I'd have to fight for, since whores don't have much honor. But I held my tongue. I went to the kitchen and made myself something to eat. "I thought we'd just order pizza," she said. "Maybe we can talk about what's bothering you." "It's just stress," I said. "And maybe some kind of bug." "Honey, you need to find something to do to blow off steam. Maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks get out with your girlfriends. My girls' nights out are working wonders on me." "I don't doubt it," I said. "Maybe you're right. Some guys at work play cards every week. Let's see if I can join their game." When I said, "I'll bet," she got nervous. I could see her tense up. I said some bullshit about playing cards to put her guard down, but I got the reaction I was looking for. I don't know if it was guilt or genuine concern, but over the next few days, Terry acted as usual. She hammered me about how much she loved me when she wasn't whining about the fact that we weren't having sex. She also talked about how we should go on vacation somewhere romantic. I didn't believe any of that. When the deadline for her next bachelorette party approached, I got a call from Crystal. "Jason, do I have to go tonight?" she asked. "Going to a bar where guys are hitting on me is not something a married woman should do. If a woman wants to stay married, she should be able to handle temptation," I said. "What if we just start having bachelorette parties at one of our houses?" she asked. "I absolutely don't care what you do after my divorce," I said. "But until then, it'll be business as usual." "Jason, I don't think she'll ever do that again," Crystal said. "She's been getting more and more upset lately. She thinks you don't love her anymore. She's constantly vacillating between thinking she did something wrong and thinking you found someone you love more. Why can't you be considerate of her feelings?" "You mean the way you treated Ed's feelings?" I spat. "Or how she treated mine? Just do what you have to do, and maybe you won't get hurt in all this. In fact, if some guy hits on her, you should encourage her to go for it." "Why the hell would I do that?" she asked. "Are you out of your mind? Do you really think I'm going to encourage her to do something so you can dump her? Why the hell would I do that?" "Because if you don't help me get rid of her, I'll help Ed get rid of you," I said calmly. "You already know the game. All you have to do is play it." "You really aren't very nice," she whined. "It was just that. She loves you." "Well, she got all the fun," I said. "And I'm only hurting. You giving me some of her back isn't going to make me feel better. I won't feel better for a long time. But at least I'll know it's over. And I'll be able to start building my life again." "What about rebuilding her life?" she asked. "She can go out and have fun with whoever she wants," I said. "So she'll get exactly what she wanted. And at least she had the choice to start it all. So I think it's only fair that I tell you how it ends." "Hell, why don't you just get a gun and blow her brains out?" she said. "I don't have a gun, but if she wants one, I'll buy one," I said. When Terry got home that night, she was nervous. "Terry, I know it's your girl's night out," I said. "So you won't mind too much if I go out and play cards with the guys tonight?" "No, honey," she said. "I don't mind at all. but I'll probably go home early. Evenings with the girls aren't as much fun anymore. Maybe we should switch to date nights. You know, one night a week where you and I go out and do something together. We could alternate who gets to do what. And at the end of the night, you could try to get me drunk and take advantage of me. She smiled and looked at me. I pretended I didn't know what she was talking about. But you don't have to worry, she continued. To the right guy, I'm just a sassy girl. I'm a real GP girl. GP? Said I. You mean PG? Doesn't that mean parental control? No, silly, she laughed. PG movies are boring. So who's it going to be? I asked. She started laughing, then looked at me. I didn't laugh. You, of course, she said nervously. If you don't want to, we don't have to have a date night. Let's just see what happens, I said. Yeah. She got ready to leave and came over to kiss me goodbye. As she wrinkled her nose, I turned my head and caught her kiss on the cheek. She just looked at me and told me to have fun with my card game. As soon as she left the house, I left too. I knew where she was going and I knew where to park, so I didn't need to follow her and risk getting caught. Besides, even if they'd moved on to another bar, I could just call Crystal and find out where they were. As fall came on, it got darker and darker earlier and earlier each week. By the time I parked my Mustang, it was starting to get dark. I parked it next to a very interesting-looking Chevy. As I approached my usual vantage point, I saw it clearly for the first time. It looked like a guy in a bloody raincoat had just climbed up the side wall of the building next to the parking lot and angled himself toward the entrance to the bar. Who did he think he was, Batman? I just thought it was ironic. Some clown in a suit snooping around the rooftops, and I'm sitting here in jeans, freezing my ass off, watching my marriage go down the chimney. He was doing it for fun, pretending to be a superhero, and I was forced into it by circumstances I really wish I never had. I hid between two parked cars to watch. It was good also because the cars shut out most of the piercing wind from me, and I was warmer. I was watching the bar scene and things were just getting started. Except for Terry and her friends, it was still empty. 3 women at a table, a young one who was very pretty, a middle-aged one who looked like she was already drunk, and a fat one who looked like she was trying not to be shy, got up and tried to dance. The younger one was in the center and seemed to know how to move. She swiveled her hips in a way that most strippers would be ashamed of. The older, stockier women tried to do that and just looked silly. I noticed that Crystal and Terry seemed to be talking. Crystal was making all sorts of expressive hand gestures as she talked. Terry looked depressed. I started to think that maybe she was really sorry for what was going on. But maybe it was just a case of her being able to realize that I was mad at her for some reason. Looking at Crystal, who was practically yelling at Terry, made me angry. If I didn't know any better, I would have sworn that Crystal had warned Terry about what was going on. I called Crystal. While I was watching her, she picked up the phone and looked at it. "Hello?" she said. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked. Even as I was watching her, she got up and walked away from the table. Are you trying to tell her that I know what's going on? I asked. Because if I do? No, she pleaded. She's just so depressed. She thinks you've fallen out of love with her. It's your fault, you know. You're doing a shitty job pretending everything's okay. I just told her the truth. I told her that if she really loves you, she should fight for her marriage and not let you leave. I'm telling you the same thing. Instead of just letting some guy take your woman, you should fight for her. If I had a chance to fight for her, I'd love to do it, I said. The thing is, I didn't get a chance to fight for her. She did everything behind my back. And what's the point of me fighting for a woman who has willingly given herself to more than one man? If she's going to go out and have fun with strange guys, she has a legal right to do so. And I'm within my rights to divorce her. People have the right to do whatever they need to do to be happy. I'm just sorry I wasn't enough for her. In the meantime, back at the ranch, I have the right to try to get out of a situation I'm not happy with, and you have the choice to do the same. If you cross me, you'll be sorry, so stick to the program. When I turned to look at Terry again, I noticed that she was sitting at the table with her head down on it. She clearly didn't want to be there. I remembered her telling me that girls' nights out weren't as much fun anymore. Then I saw a guy walk in front of the bar. It was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. Even as he walked, he seemed to blur across the walkway. It reminded me of a strobe light effect. I saw him, and then I saw him again, but 10 or 12 feet farther away from where he had appeared before. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I somehow sensed that this was going to be a problem. Right? He seemed older than most of the people heading toward the bar, and that made me uneasy. Almost as if on cue, the bastard entered the bar, and although I had to concentrate hard to see him among the other customers, it wasn't hard to spot him. He raised his hand, and Terry stood up, like a puppet bound to him by hidden threads. She started to move toward him as he turned and headed for the door. He stopped near the bar, around which people were crowding in and out of the bar. Terry robotically walked out of the bar and stood in front of him. He took her hand and began to lead her behind the bar. I'm not sure how I still felt about Terry at that moment, but something strange was going on here. As he led her into the darkness of the alley behind the bar, I moved before it was even registered. I also noticed that my reactions weren't the same. I think that's when I noticed my head starting to hurt when I looked too closely at a guy. As I crossed the street and headed toward the alley in pursuit of Terry and the guy, I heard footsteps behind me. I ran into the alley, and luckily the moon came up at that time. Even though all the streetlights there were out, I could see well enough to make out my surroundings and what was there. There were a bunch of homeless people there. They were sitting on empty crates and dumpsters. They were looking at me too when I ran into the alley. "Hey!" I yelled. He turned around and looked at me with a grin. Terry didn't even react to my presence. That's when I realized this wasn't just a case of cheating. She was drugged or hypnotized or something. She didn't even know who I was. Her eyes were blank. He was the only one who checked in. "Get off my wife!" I yelled. He growled at me, like he was an animal or something. He started looking around, and the homeless people became more animated. I guess it was supposed to be a warning or something. I was feeling weird. Everything in my brain was saying, run. My mind was telling me that I was done with Terry anyway, but something else was telling me to stay. No one ever took what I wanted from me. I was going to get rid of Terry's cheating ass anyway, but I wouldn't let someone take it away. He turned to Terry again, and she threw her head back. He leaned down as if he was going to kiss her neck, and then I saw his teeth. His fangs lengthened, and he opened his mouth much wider than it was possible. The word vampire flashed through my mind. I didn't miss a beat. I reached down into the dirt of the alley and grabbed the biggest rock I could throw. I threw it at him as hard as I could, and it hit him in the head. I usually threw knives and even throwing stars as part of my weapons regimen. The rock made a very hard sound on impact. I expected it to knock him out and possibly kill him. But hell, there were no witnesses here except those homeless people. And even if there had been, he tried to attack my wife. Well, screw it. I don't know which of us was more surprised when the rock hit him. He was wearing some scruffy sunglasses, and the rock knocked them off. His clothes were dirty and unfashionable. His shaggy hair was lifeless. His fingers ended in claw-like outgrowths, more like animal claws than human fingernails. An unholy odor emanated from him. The smell was like the nauseating odor of death, mixed with the earthy smell of raw earth, with a dash of raw sewage for extra fun. As the cheap shadows fell from his face, crashing against the stone, his mouth opened and he roared loudly. He had a large bruise on his head where the stone had struck, and his head was turned to the side, as if the blow had broken or dislocated his neck. When he straightened his neck, there was a ringing sound. His eyes lit up. They were a sickening red color as he looked at me. My mouth dropped open in shock at the same time as his did in outrage. We looked at each other with a mutual but different expression of the same thought. Surprise. He was surprised that I was still here. I honestly believed he expected his mental projections, or the thoughts he was trying to influence me with to make me go away and forget about Terry. At the same time, if his mental trickery hadn't worked, I should have been so frightened that I would have gotten the hell out of Dodge. At the same time, I was shocked that a blow to the temple with a rock the size of a baseball, thrown as hard as I could, didn't kill him, or at least knock him out. And the huge bruise on the side of his head seemed to heal with miraculous speed. In a few moments, no one would have been able to tell that he had taken a blow that should have easily killed him. He tossed Terry aside and swung his arms at me. He had no technique, but he was blindingly fast. So what? I was fast too. At least I always thought I was. The only thing that saved me was his pure rage. If he had calmly swung at me and used his claws, I would have been dead. I managed to dodge his first two wild swings, but he forced me backward and got his way. I dodged the first punch, the second, and caught the third, blocking it with my stomach. I've been punched in the stomach by very big and very good fighters. I'm not an expert in unarmed combat. I specialize in weapons. I love swords, knives, axes, spears, maces, clubs, and everything else you can think of except firearms. But I often spar with boxers and MMA fighters to hone my fighting instincts. I've never been hit so hard in my life. I barely had time to roll over and deflect some of the force of the blow. If he had hit me straight on, I would have died. But the blow threw me back at least 10 feet. I landed awkwardly in a puddle of what I hoped was mud. He roared with anger again and lunged at me. I was lying in the mud, too stunned to get to my feet, and I was being chased by an honest-to-goodness vampire. In that moment when all seemed lost, when I knew I couldn't even get up to run away, let alone keep fighting, I felt footsteps beside me. I turned to the side as the monster that had defeated me, with only a light blow, smirked and bared its beastly teeth. The first thing I saw were red leather thigh-length boots trimmed in white. On the other side of me, I could see slightly larger boots of thick green leather. I turned back towards the red boots, and following them, I found a body clad in a hooded cloak made entirely of soft, shiny red leather. I couldn't make out a face, but the presence was overwhelmingly female. I was still panting and was able to shout a warning with surprising energy. "Get out of here, quickly!" I wheezed. "He's an unstoppable demon of the night who will soon be slain," the woman in the green hood hissed. The woman to my left in the green outfit glared at him, while the one on my right seemed more concerned with me. He roared again, and the woman in the green outfit thrust a 5-foot-long mace into the ground, with a vicious spike on the top of the mace and a thick blade on the opposite end. The mace hit the ground with surprising force. The vampiress glared at it while her red-hooded friend tried to help me to my feet. I couldn't see their faces because of the hoods, but the vamp was looking at them with much more concern than he was looking at me. As he looked at the woman in green, a crossbow bolt struck him in the shoulder, just a few inches from his heart. He cried out in pain and snatched it up, still smoking. He rushed to run, turning his strobe light on full blast. A third woman appeared out of the darkness. She was dressed head to toe in white leather and a hooded cloak very similar to the other two. Before any of them could try to chase the vampiress, all the homeless people in the alley pounced on us like zombies. The woman in white climbed onto the roof of a dumpster the size of a dump truck and started shooting at them with her crossbow. The woman in green started hitting them with her mace. The woman in red next to me started chopping them with an incredible spear. "There are too many of them. We need to leave," said the woman in white. I was getting better, and my strength was returning. There's no way I'd let a bunch of women protect me while I'm doing nothing. The woman in red was very close to me and didn't consider me a threat. When her cloak opened, I saw that she was wearing a daizyo. A daizyo is a traditional pair of samurai swords. I grabbed her katana, and she turned to look at me in shock. When she raised her spear to defend herself against me, I cut down the man behind her who was trying to hit her with a rock. Her cloak fluttered in the darkness, and she nodded her head at me in thanks. After that, the battle became too intense to devote time to anything but fighting. Let me say that again. I hate using other people's swords. But in this case, it was necessary for survival. The only upside was that the people we were fighting didn't have the technique and were in the same drugged or enchanted state that Terry was in. I tried not to kill anyone and noticed my temporary allies shaking their heads a lot. They muttered incessantly as we trudged through the homeless zombies. "Only one left," one of the women said. I turned and looked at her just as she said, "I got her." I moved faster than I had ever moved in my life. I covered the distance between the woman in green and Terry faster than I'd ever run before. I caught the back of the katana blade with the staff of my mace. The woman in green clearly didn't realize my attention. "Well, aren't you greedy?" She laughed. The voice coming from beneath the hood was filled with amusement, aggression, and perhaps a little anger. As she spoke, 2 others joined us. "Fine," she said. "You can kill her. You see, sisters, this is why we don't work with men. They're all the same. They're all selfish and greedy." "I'm not going to kill her," I hissed. "Then get out of my way and I will," the green-skinned woman said. She raised her mace and pole and I blocked her again. This time I blocked it before she could even swing. The mace had a huge head with an almost needle-like spike on the end that was at least 4 inches long. At the other end was a very sharp, spear-like blade. "No one is going to kill her," I said. "That's what you say," said the woman in green. This time she swung a mace and pole at me. I repelled it easily, but the attack was only a pretense. She raised the other end, and I jumped back, moving out of harm's way. She continued her attack, and I dodged the vertical strike. When the heavy mace head came down on my side, I brought the tip of my katana down on it, causing the mace head to fall into the dirt. I then raised my foot and stomped on the shaft, breaking it. She jumped back in surprise, finding that she was left with only half of her weapon. The woman in red stepped between us, ending the duel. "Why use weapons when you can solve the problem with words?" she asked. "He is a fool, sister," the woman in green said angrily. This woman is far worse than all the others put together. Most of those fools were just mesmerized. They were supposed to wake up and remember nothing of what happened. We killed them because they were weak and especially vulnerable to the vampire's will. He could contact them from a great distance with a mere thought and make them do anything. But this woman has had a taste of the vampire. She'll turn, and then we'll have to deal with two of them. And this vampire is very old and very nasty. He had the sense to walk into a public tavern full of people. They both have to die. And for the greater good, if that fool wants to die protecting her, so be it. The woman in red turned to me. She pulled back her hood, and I saw her for the first time. It was as if all my life my world had been black and white, and then suddenly there was color. Her long, unruly hair was a very light brown. The highlights alone, the different shades and tones in her hair could be categorized for hours. There were shades of gold, blonde, and even red mixed in with the brown color. I swear, I could stare at that hair for hours. But those hours would have been wasted because her face was so much more interesting. Her big, innocent hazel eyes were so expressive that it seemed as if she could tell everything she thought and felt with those eyes alone. One moment, they seemed innocent and cheerful. The next moment, you could tell that she had been through so much pain and death that it was a wonder how she was still breathing. Her nose was a perfect button with a small, almost imperceptible bump at the tip. I had seen the same flaw on many fighters. It told me that their noses were broken. In her case, it only added to her beauty. I think a more literate person than I would say that her slight imperfection only added to her beauty. Then there was her mouth. The expression Cupid's bow had to be coined to describe those lips. The strangest part was that her natural color made the need for lipstick or makeup insignificant. The strangest thing was that when I looked at her, she looked back at me. I don't know how long we stood there, locked in each other's gazes. Time seemed to stop, and neither of us wanted to or could look away. The woman in white finally interrupted that gaze. She pulled back her hood and lowered her crossbow so that the end of it rested on the ground. Her hair was almost as white as her skin. She seemed older than the woman in red, but that could only be my perception. She was beautiful too. It was hard to tell her age from her unshaven face. She could have been between 30 and 60 years old. She was shorter in stature than the other two, and, from what I could make out in her cloak, of a much denser build. In addition to her crossbow, she carried two weapons that were either very short swords or very long daggers. They hung on a frog to her left under her cloak. "Sister Penance," she said. "Perhaps we should inform him of the danger and let him make his own decision. He has earned that right." At that moment, the woman in green also pulled back her hood. Her hair, unlike that of her friends, was cut very short. She was taller and thicker than the other two. Her thick arms and legs spoke of great strength. This woman was an Amazon. "Look, you fool," she said angrily. "Or may I call you Ken? Ken, Barbie as you know her no longer exists. She's under the control of a very powerful, very ruthless bastard who now sees you as a threat. Unlike us, you don't have the training, discipline, or intelligence to deal with it. Barbie's life is over. From now on, her existence will be a living hell. The best way to save her soul is to put her out of her misery. Look at her." She snapped her fingers several times in front of Terry's face. Terry didn't react. "See Ken," the woman in green said. There was sarcasm in her voice. "The best thing we can do is end her. She won't even know it happened. It will be quick and painless." "Sister Penance," the woman in white said. "Perhaps you should let someone else explain it. You're being too straightforward." "Man," she said, looking at me. "Your friend is at least fascinated and is probably halfway to becoming like the creature you saw. If he wishes, she will destroy you in your sleep. At this point, she is nothing more than an extension of his will. The kindest thing to do would be to end her torment. If you care for her as Prudence seems to think you do, you will not want her to suffer. And if you are the kind of person I think you are, you must realize that she is a danger to everyone around her. The creature that controls her has no morals, no sense of honor. It exists only for blood and its own selfish needs. She needs her torment to end." "Jason," Prudence said softly, "are you sure you realize what you've gotten yourself into?" I was shocked on two fronts. The first was that she somehow recognized my name. That was somewhat disconcerting. I'd never seen her before, and she knew who I was. And she spoke to me as if we were friends or had some sort of connection. Sure, she was beautiful. Probably the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. But I had a hard time accepting the fact that she apparently knew a lot about me, while I knew nothing about them. The second problem was that for some reason she thought she could tell me what I needed to do, or anything about my relationship with Terry. She pulled even closer to me and I realized something was wrong. I saw her eyes open even wider, and I realized she felt it too. Her presence was overwhelming. She smelled like soap, fresh air, and just magic. Standing next to her was like standing next to a generator. There was energy radiating from her in waves. She started squirming even as she spoke to me. "Jason," she repeated. "Jesus, what's wrong with her?" Penance asked. "Forget about it. Patience, Prudence, let's just go. If she rips his stupid head off, it's not our problem. We tried to warn him. He's a big boy. Let him pick his own toys. It's not our fault if he picks a blood-sucking Barbie with a kung fu handle." "Penance, if you don't want to stay, you don't have to," Prudence said. "In fact, maybe you two should try to find another lead for the vampiress. I'll try to explain to Jason what he's gotten himself into trying to do our job." The other two looked at each other, and then at Prudence like she was crazy. "You're going off with some man by yourself?" Penance asked. "She knows what she's doing," said Patience. "I'm sure her actions will prove to be very prudent in the long run." "Go with God's sister," Patience told Prudence. "If he tries anything, call me, and I'll gut him, or her. Or both of them," Penance hissed. Then they were gone, leaving us alone, except for Terry, or what was left of her. I didn't know what to do, so I held out the katana I'd borrowed from her. She smiled, pulled a cloth from a hidden pocket, and wiped the blade clean, then returned it to the saya or scabbard she wore on the low double belt on her hip. The way she carried the swords was interesting. They weren't threaded through her belt like the samurai wore. They dangled at her hip, suspended from a double belt in a style similar to, but different from, the way swordsmen carried their rapiers in the 17th century. "We need to get her to you and secure her so we can talk," she said. "Wait, who the hell are you?" I asked. "And why do you call yourselves sisters? You don't look like you're related. The other two have accents. They're very slight, but still there. None of you look the same." "Jason, we're moonlighting," she said. "But I promise I'll tell you everything you want to know. I'll even tell you what I shouldn't. You saved me there, didn't you?" "She saved me first," I smiled and said. "I parked by your car," she said. She gently took Terry by one arm and me by the other, and we headed toward the parking lot. The early evening faded and darkness fell. We were really, as she said, burning in the moonlight as we walked back past the bar, with Terry walking between us. She looked as if she'd had too much to drink, which simplified any explanation we could give. On the other hand, explaining Prudence was simply impossible. How do you explain that a 6-foot-tall, golden-haired goddess is dressed exclusively in red leather? How do you explain that she carries a spear and 2 swords under an ankle-length hooded cloak? Halloween, of course. As it turned out, we didn't need an explanation. Despite being looked at several times, no one stopped us or questioned us. We made it to the parking lot without incident. We loaded my wife's still zombified uniform into my car, and Prudence stowed the weapons in hers. The strange Chevy I was looking at earlier turned out to be her car. As the eerily silent Volt followed my Mustang, I kept thinking about the old joke. You know, when a kid tells his father about the dog that followed him home and asks if he can keep it. Hell, Prudence followed me home. Does that mean I can keep her? Mentally, I slapped myself. I was still married to Terry and I was already having thoughts of another woman. What kind of asshole was I? Probably a very healthy one, since Terry cheated on me with several men and then got involved with... I still had a hard time calling that thing a vampire. I just didn't want to believe they existed. And if they were supposed to exist, why the hell couldn't they look like Kate Beckinsale? Vampires are supposed to be in shiny black armor and work boots, with a pouty expression and a subtle British accent. She should be falling from the top of a 10-story building and walking away from it only to come up to me and stare at me with her incredible blue eyes and then... Damn, I almost ran a red light. Fortunately, my huge 14-inch Brembo brakes stopped me before I drove into the oncoming lane. Terry, strapped in next to me in the passenger seat, was still looking straight ahead, not noticing anything. A few minutes later, we pulled into our driveway. Prudence got out of the car and came over to help me with Terry. When we entered the house, she politely asked if she could take off her coat. She left her spear in the car and took the swords with her. If I had been lulled into inaction before by looking into her eyes, the sight of her body was even more overwhelming. Prudence was almost 6 feet tall, yet very well built. In fact, she looked like someone had just looked through a catalog of high-performance female parts and created the perfect woman. I know it's rude to stare, but she seemed pleased to have the attention. She insisted on checking the house to make sure there were no unexpected guests. I could hear her going from room to room looking around the house, and suddenly I stopped hearing her movements. I sat Terry down on the couch and went to see if she was okay. I found her in my training room. Her eyes were glowing as she looked at the swords displayed on floor-to-ceiling racks along one wall. I knew it wasn't just luck, she said, noticing my presence. Your movements were too practiced for you to lack any training in handling weapons. That's unusual in this day and age. Someday, you'll have to tell me why a guy like you has so many swords. Some of them are beautiful, but there are very few antiques here, and your swords are all dead. I didn't know swords could live, I said. She followed me into the living room, where Terry sat just as I left her. Jason, I'm not your enemy, she said. Far from the enemy, in fact. Perhaps I shouldn't tell you this, but you amaze me. I envy you, your choices, and your actions. I thought it sounded funny, since I'm just a regular guy who likes swords. And what's up with your, sisters? I asked. You never explained it to me. It's very simple, Jason, she said. We belong to a special order within the church. We are called the Sisters of Destiny. Our job is to deal with threats like this, and we— Are you telling me this shit is real? I asked loudly. My voice was so shrill and loud that even Terry turned to look at me. Prudence only nodded her head. She looked at me with genuine concern on her face. Vampires are real? I asked. What about werewolves? What about— Yes, werewolves exist, she said. Do they get hairy and turn? I asked. Where does the hair come from? And where do they go when they turn back? As far as we can tell, it's all the result of a fantastic surge of hormones, she said. When they change, things don't happen quite like they do in the movies. All the hair just falls out in all the wrong places. What else have you seen? I asked. Well, not all of our business takes place in the United States, she said. So most of us are from different countries. Patience is Russian, of course, and repentance is Irish, and— Wait a minute, I said. It suddenly hit me. You said you were from the church, the Catholic Church? You have to be some kind of nun? You can't be a nun. Why not? She asked. Because you can't be one, I replied nervously. You're too— Too what? She asked. Too young? There are many nuns in penance who are younger than I am. There are some who are fresh out of high school, too. Too hot, I said angrily. What do you mean hot? She asked. She rubbed her forehead and then mine. At the contact, we both flinched. I guess I don't feel any hotter than you, she said, smiling. Hot means attractive, I snapped back. Oh, so nuns are supposed to be ugly? She asked, smiling. Okay, obviously that's not true, I said. Because if they were, they wouldn't let you in. So you're saying I don't have what it takes to pass the ugly test? She asked, smiling. I was starting to feel weird, so I changed the subject. So what kind of things have you encountered? I asked. I noticed the gleam in her eyes get brighter, and she finally took her hand off my forehead. Well, just in this neighborhood alone, you have some of the strangest cases. By this neighborhood, I mean the Midwestern United States, she said. We ran into a high school track coach who is married, and very happily, to a very real witch. There's a Native American who actually has shamanic-like skills, and he seems to have a connection to the spirit of the Great Lakes. It was too powerful for us to handle. There's even a machine similar to yours that— There's an evil Mustang? I asked. I wouldn't really call him evil, she said. He's just overprotective. It seems like the car has been possessed by the spirit of the owner's first girlfriend. Did you guys kill a witch? I asked. You know, like in the Bible. You're not supposed to let a witch live. No, she said, smiling. She turned out to be one of the nicest people I've ever met. If we ever laid eyes on that woman, the whole town would come down on us like the plague. What about the shaman? I asked. We didn't even get a chance to talk to him, she said. He sat down on the bank in front of the lake. I think it was Lake Superior. Every time we approached it, the wind picked up to hurricane force. The wind was just blowing our cars away. It was too dangerous, and not just for us, but for the people in the neighborhood. Besides, it didn't hurt anyone or do anything wrong. So we decided not to read the Bible, but to read the Beatles. You know, live and let live. At this point, we were interrupted by Terry's groan. She's coming out of it, Prudence said. We should use the next few minutes to get the answers you've been looking for. What do you mean? I asked. Jason, I've been watching you from the roof for weeks now. I overheard your conversation with that horrible woman at Crystal. Right now, your wife is still in a daze, but she's starting to clear up. If you ask her what you really want to know about, she will tell you the truth. Getting out of the mind's control is almost like a truth serum. She lacks the awareness to evade it. At least in this case, you will get answers to your questions. What you do with that information is up to you. Terry, I said. She groaned again and looked at me. Why did you cheat on me? I asked. I didn't cheat, she muttered. Cheating is wrong. Just experimented a little. Wanted to see what it would be like. How many experiments have you done? I asked. Just 4, she replied. Stupid men. None of them were any good. I'm lucky to have a husband. None of them are as skilled as he is. They're all too fast, too slow, or just no good at anything. I love Jason. She smiled stupidly, and then looked at me, and her smile got even wider. You know what I mean? Prudence asked. At least now you know. She looked at me frantically while Terry's head was tilted to the side. Terry was like a broken doll. At certain points, her head would come up and she would start looking around the room. I think it wasn't Terry who surprised Prudence, but me. Why are you crying? She asked. Prudence did seem upset that I was crying, but she had no idea why. That tipped me off that something was wrong with her. Most people in our situation would realize that I've loved Terry for a very long time. When you're connected to another person for a long time and you give them your heart, the betrayal of that trust is very painful. I looked at the golden-haired goddess pretending to be a nun. There was no guile in her smile. She genuinely didn't understand what I was going through. Haven't you ever fallen in love, Sister Prudence? I asked. Of course, she replied. I am in love even now. I love God, and I love the church. I'm sorry, I said. But it's not the same thing. It's just a different kind of love. When you give someone your heart and trust completely, and find out they've betrayed you by doing something that's supposed to symbolize your love and commitment to each other with someone else, it really hurts a lot. Then you want me to kill her? She asked. I shook my head. No. In fact, she's already dead. Eventually, the vampire will summon her again and either drain her or turn her. And either way, she'll either be undead or just dead. So there's no way we can save her? I asked. There's no spiritual or magical technique to save her. Why do you care? Prudence asked. And anyway, what did she do to betray you? It's not like she told anyone else she loved him. In fact, she said she loved you. So what did she do? She did it with those other guys, I said. Oh, that, Prudence said. Yeah, that, I said. What does that really mean? She asked. Sex is just another bodily function. You shouldn't give it too much importance. Sister Prudence, I said with annoyance. Didn't you have boyfriends before you became a nun? You're pretty. You must have had lots of them. I've always been a nun, she said. Members of our order are raised in a convent. So you're, I asked. What? She interjected. You never? Asked I. No, she said. So you've never had sex? God, no, she said, surprised. Why would I do that? Prudence, it feels really good, and it kind of connects you to the other person. It's a way to connect souls with someone you really care about, I said. Oh, she said. So it's like a prayer. No, I said. It's not like a prayer. I'm not sure I can explain to you what love is because I don't feel it anymore. Okay then, she said, smiling. Since you don't love her anymore, let's destroy her and end it all. Damn it. You're out for blood so you can become a nun, I sighed. Even if I don't love her anymore, I still don't want her dead. It just means I don't want to have a relationship with her anymore. I don't want to live with her anymore. How do you know when you're falling in love? She asked. Prue, shouldn't we be discussing a way to save Terry? I asked. If we have to, she sighed. If we interrupt the bloodline, all his halflings and slaves will be freed. Halflings and slaves will be free, but all the full vampires he created will lose all their powers or die. So Terry will be okay then? I asked. She nodded her head and kept looking at me. Jason, do you have any idea how hard this is going to be to accomplish? She asked. You've already seen what this creature is capable of. You hit him over the head with a rock, and all it did was knock his glasses off. A blow like that would kill an elephant. He's faster and stronger than 5 men. If you inflict a wound on him, it will heal immediately. He has the cunning of most large predators. He's ruthless and relentless, and he... What about you guys? I asked. Don't you guys do this for a living? Don't you look like damned ghost hunters? Her face was calm but casual. Truth be told, I've never seen a vampire older than me destroyed, she said. Fledglings sometimes manage to breed. Halflings fall too. And slaves are easily defeated. But with older, experienced vampires, The most we can hope for is to move them. They settle in a neighborhood. Someone convinces their priest. The priest calls the bishop calls the cardinal calls the Vatican. They send us. We do research and comb the area. Most of the time, it never leads to a confrontation with them. It's enough for them to sense we're in the area, and they pack up and move. Our appearance alone is enough for the smarter ones to realize it's time to leave. But this guy was different, she said. It was like he wanted to see what would happen. Like he wanted to test us. When Patience hit him with a crossbow bolt dipped in holy water, he ran away. If she'd hit him in the heart, it would have finished him off. It would have served as a stake. It let him know we were serious, so he probably got the hell out of the area. If we can't find him, we can't kill him. And if we can't kill him, we can't save your woman. Save her from what? Terry asked. She was holding her head and looking back and forth at me and Prudence. Terry was 6'2", and Prudence towered over her at 6'11" with 3 feet of golden hair, and she decided she was still out of it. Honey, what's going on? She asked. Who is this woman? I didn't say a word. I ignored her. She got up and walked over to me. Jason, are you angry with me? She asked. What did I do? I didn't do anything. Then I guess you call doing nothing what you told me to do, I said. Her face lowered. It's not what you think, she said softly. I know. Terry, get away from me. I don't want to talk to you right now. You don't even know what you've gotten yourself into. I just need to find a way to save you so we can divorce and go our separate ways. This marriage is over. That's when Terry started crying loudly. I just stood there looking at her. As much as I wanted to take her in my arms and comfort her, I was so angry at her for betraying me that I just didn't want to deal with her. It reminded me of those little kids who fall down and start crying. Once they notice that no one is going to pick them up, they stop crying. When Terry noticed that Prudence and I were talking about other things while she was crying, she stopped crying and came over to see what was going on. Jason, your friend needs to leave so we can talk about our marriage. I don't want a divorce. I'm in love with you. And I'm Catholic. We can't get a divorce, so we're going to have to work things out, she said. I promise it won't happen again. And you can get a divorce, Prudence said. I'll arrange it for you. The process is very simple. Well, maybe not. But in this case, it will be just like that. Step 1. He files for divorce. I'll get a Catholic judge to expedite the process. Once you get a civil divorce decree, you have to go to your priest, who will go to the bishop, etc. From the church, you usually get an annulment, which means that in the eyes of the church, the marriage never happened. I would call the Vatican and ask them to expedite the process for you. It might be available in a few weeks. That's impossible, Terry snapped back. Divorce and annulments are supposed to take years. That way, people don't enter the process lightly. You mean the way you cheated on me to scratch your itch, I hissed. I'm not going to worry about that, Terry said. We're not going to get a divorce. Prudence threw her head back and laughed. She pulled out her cell phone. It looked like a regular iPhone 5, but it was red with white trim like her skin. She made a call and spoke in Italian. She said a few words and asked what my last name was. She said it was just to be sure. Then she spoke again, using my full name and Terry's first name. She stood for a moment, holding the phone in her hands, and then smiled. Is your name Teresa Eunice Grant? She asked. Terry nodded her head. Prudence gave her the okay sign and continued talking. Then she hung up and started talking to me again about our plans. What did you do? Terry asked. Wait, replied Prudence. Less than 5 minutes later, the phone rang. Terry nervously picked up the phone and answered it. Her eyes grew huge. Someone must be playing a joke on you, she said. We don't want an annulment. That's not going to happen. I have to go. For a good Catholic woman like Terry to hang up on the bishop was just unbelievable. You bitch, Terry shouted. You called the Vatican for real. How the hell did you do that? Stay out of my business. Prudence didn't find Terry's anger threatening, so she turned away and ignored her just like I did. Then Terry turned to me and started yapping at me. Jason, I don't want a divorce. Please, honey, give me another chance. Terry, you should probably call Crystal and tell her that she lied to me in an attempt to save you. She completely misrepresented how many guys you cheated on me with. Tell her she knows what that means. Tell her I won't do anything until I get the situation with you straightened out, but she needs to get her affairs in order. I went back to my conversation with Prudence. Prudence and I talked through the night. An hour or so after midnight, she left where she was staying. She promised to be back before dusk the next day. As soon as Prudence left, Terry lashed out at me. She whined and coaxed and begged. The most interesting thing I noticed was that she remembered the guys she'd slept with, but she remembered nothing and knew nothing about the vampire. Prudence and I had a plan for that too. We decided that the next night he would try to contact her, call her or something. We decided that we would use Terry as bait and call her wherever he called. After making sure he doesn't get her, we'll follow him back to his lair. I don't think Terry realized it, but I was done with her. I wanted to save her life, but our life together was over. As soon as Prudence left, I started getting ready for bed. I should have been hungry, but all the activity, stress, and emotional turmoil had taken its toll. All I wanted to do was lay down and just fall asleep. I took a quick shower and got into bed. As soon as my head touched the pillow, I passed out. I don't know how long I had been asleep when Terry walked into the room. She slid under the covers and tried to climb into bed with me. I opened my eyes and realized two things. The first was that if the vampire tried to use Terry, I could be dead. There was no way I was going to try to sleep next to her during the night hours while he was awake. It was too dangerous. Two, I didn't want her sleeping with me or being near me. Terry, what do you think you're doing? I asked. I'm going to sleep, she said. Unless you want to make me a better offer. You haven't touched me in 2 weeks. Her eyes lowered as she realized why. Jason, I haven't done anything with anyone but you in over a month, she said. That's all in the past. I realized I didn't need to experiment. I've always had the best man for me in my bed. I've never stopped loving you, darling. And I've never loved anyone else. I just wanted to see what it was like. Crystal does it, and Sarah does it too. I know it sounds really stupid, but it was just sex. But Jason, you had a lot more people than I did. I guess I liked what we were doing so much that I wanted to learn more about myself. And maybe I wanted to try something that you and I hadn't done yet, to teach it to you. I didn't do it to hurt you, Jason. For your sake, I also went against my values. I used condoms. I had to make sure I didn't catch some disease. I also had to make sure I didn't get pregnant. I only want to have your baby, honey. I know I was wrong, and I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Can't we start over again? I forgive you, I said. We can begin again. She threw back the covers and tried to climb into bed. I pushed her and she lost her balance and fell to the floor next to the bed. That was mean, Jason, she laughed. Terry, you need to go sleep in the guest room, I said. For how long? She asked. Forever, I said. At least until the divorce is finalized and we have a separate place to live. But you said we could start over, she said. You said you'd forgive me. Her eyes got watery and she whimpered. I forgive you. I forgive you because I don't have the time or energy to carry around all that hate, I said. And we can start over. We're starting from scratch. Only this time I know what a slut you are, so I wouldn't count on us getting back together. It's all that woman, isn't it? She hissed. Okay, Jason, I made a mistake. And now you want to use that mistake to try to replace me with your tall blonde supermodel. Terry, just shut up before you say something stupid, I said. Prudence is a nun. She's also a woman, and I saw the way she looked at you, Terry snapped back. Why don't you go and entertain her? Then we'll be even and we can get our marriage back on track. Terry, I warned you, but you went and said something stupid anyway, didn't you? Said I. Good night. Nana! She slipped out of the room and I closed the door behind her. In the bedroom, one of my favorite swords hung on the wall. Paul Chen's Golden Eagle katana was probably one of the most beautiful swords I'd ever owned. It wasn't finished in gold or anything like that, but it was a well-made functional katana that was really nice to look at. I took it off the wall and placed it on the bed next to me. I also set off the house alarm. If Terry or the vampire who was monitoring it tried to get into the room, they'd have to break down the door and then cut in. I also knew it would be morning in an hour or two, so close to dawn in an unfamiliar area would be unwise. I figured the vampire would wait until the next evening. I was awakened by a knock. It was insistent and yet soft at the same time. I unlocked and opened my bedroom door to find Terry sleeping on the floor just outside the door. I walked over and noticed how beautifully she was sleeping. I picked her up and put her on the bed in the guest room, located at the end of the hallway. Just as I laid her down, there was another knock. It was someone quietly knocking on my front door. I looked at my watch and realized why I was still so damn tired. I had only slept for about 40 minutes. It was barely 4 in the morning. I headed for the front door, ready to give whoever was in there the worst verbal whipping he'd ever received. When I opened the door, I had to hold my breath, which I was about ready to let out when I saw who it was. What happened, Prue? I asked. I could tell from the general expression on her face that it was something bad. I hate coming here, she said, but I can't think of anywhere else to go. Sister Prudence, you're always welcome here, I said. She smiled, but her smile didn't have the sincerity I had come to expect from her. Then I noticed her car was in my driveway, and it wasn't empty. What's wrong, Prue? I asked. We need help, she said. I followed her to her car. I was shocked at what I saw. Penance was sitting in the passenger seat, hunched over and in pain. Patience was sitting in the back, leaning against a short man who appeared to be in a state of shock. When I got back to, began Prudence. Let's get them inside first, I said. I reached out to help Penance out of the seat, but she grinned and yanked her hand away. The movement hurt her, and despite her bravado, she whimpered. I slid the seat forward and tried to get the short man in the back seat to get out. His eyes seemed glazed. He just stared straight ahead, not understanding anything. Prudence touched his shoulder, and he recoiled. She spoke to him in a soothing voice, and he turned to look at her. She gently took his hand and pulled him from his seat. I saw Patience go limp in the seat, and I leaned toward her. I put one hand behind her back and put the other under her little legs at her knees and lifted her out of the car. She obviously couldn't stand, so I carried her into the house and slammed the door behind me. I headed toward the guest room at the back of the house, and before I reached it quite a bit, I found Penance blocking my path. Where are you taking her? She asked. She can't get up, I said. I was going to take her to a room where we could lay her down, and then you or Prue could examine her and figure out what's wrong with her. Get out of my way, sister, Patience said weakly. He's only trying to make me comfortable. Penance moved out of the way, grumbling at the same time. I turned and spoke to her. I won't be able to open the door when we get there, and I won't be able to get things off the bed. Would you mind helping me? I think she realized I was just trying to calm her anxiety by letting her accompany her friend. She followed me and hurriedly opened the door I pointed out to her. Of the 3 guest rooms in the house, I chose the one that Terry liked the best. It was at the opposite end of the building from our room. The room was painted yellow and had large windows that let in the sunlight. I gently placed her on the bed and told her that Prue would come in to check on her. I asked if she needed anything. She replied that she was fine, and I left, bringing Penance with me. I found Prudence. She was trying to calm the baby. He was screaming. He was clearly upset. What does he have to do with this? I asked. He's one of our computer technicians, she said. I grabbed the toddler and dragged him out of the room. The first few steps he followed me. I led him to my office and sat him down in front of the computer. He booted it up and then looked at me. What do you want from me? He asked. He didn't seem all that upset or nervous. That was pretty slick, Penance said. Prue, can you tell him about anything to do with computers or the internet? I asked. When someone has experienced trauma, going back to familiar territory, like computers, is very helpful. She asked him to contact their base and report what happened. I noticed Penance was still leaning on her arm and realized the reason. Her shoulder was dislocated. Both her shoulder and Penance needed medical attention. I have a friend who is a nurse. She works as a medical technician for a large manufacturing company. She has to be at the plant by 6 in the morning, so I figured she was probably up by now. I dialed a number on my iPhone and started talking to her. She wasn't actually up, but she agreed to come over. She said it would take about an hour. I went to tell Patience that, but she was already asleep. I told Patience that the nurse wouldn't be in for another hour at the earliest, and she nodded her head. I offered her ice to reduce the swelling, but she decided to wait for the nurse. She kept looking at me as if she expected me to grow horns and a tail at any moment. Finally, Prudence, Penance, and I went into the office where Myron, the computer guy, was solving something on the internet. We all sat down in comfortable chairs to talk. After I left here, I was really worried about leaving you alone with your wife, Prudence said. I was sure he would try to do something through her. I expected him to try to get her to kill you. You almost killed him with that stone, didn't you? Anyway, by the time I got back to the monastery where we were staying, it was all over. It looked like someone had torn down the fence. There was no one in the guard hut, so I decided to give them hell about it. I guess I thought they were shirking their duties. Anyway, when I went inside, all I saw were dead bodies. I went through the whole building and found Penance trying to get Patience out the back door. After that, we picked up Myron, who was hiding in a storage room in the basement. It was awful, Penance began. We've been back a long time. In fact, I was already starting to worry about Prudence when I heard a scream from downstairs. I grabbed my 2 hand maces because someone. She paused and looked at me. Someone had shattered the shaft of my mace. I found the head of the mace. It's over 300 years old, and it was used by a famous Polish saint, she said. Sister, We are not really interested in the history of your mace, Prudence said softly. When I looked down the stairs, I noticed that the entire lower level was filled with these slaves, Penance said. That's when I realized that the vampire had returned and followed us home. He's much smarter than any of the creatures we've ever encountered. Most vamps are animal-like. I've never even heard one of them speak. I mean, let's face it, they're dead. Their brains don't work anymore. Other than the fact that they're at least twice as strong as a human, some rudimentary psychic abilities, and those long teeth, they're less than human. I've shot a few of them myself, but this guy is just scary. He let the slaves serve as cannon fodder. The guards wasted their bullets on the trolls. They found 1 or 2 rounds and shot him when he finally entered. But we all know bullets don't work against these creatures. Perhaps if they had been consecrated or soaked in holy water like our weapons, but it was useless. As the slaves occupied the first floor, the vampire climbed the stairs. Patience tried to stop him. We thought it was an accident. The first crossbow bolt hit his tattered cloak he's wearing, and he just hung there. It reloaded the crossbow and hit him again, and we noticed that he had obviously gotten armor from somewhere. It's unbelievable that one of these creatures could guess that it could defend itself by wearing armor. I tried to stop him, but he just brushed me off with the back of his hand. He wasn't even interested in me. The blow he hit me with threw me across the room, and I landed on that arm, dislocating it. He hit Patience even harder. I swear I thought her back was broken as she bounced off the wall. At that moment, the few surviving guards pounced on him and he lost sight of us. That's when I grabbed Patience and dragged her into one of the offices on the second floor. I knew we were both out of the fight. I chose that office because it had one of the old cul-de-sacs that used to be used for laundry. I got us into it and down the shaft, holding Patience in my injured hand. It hurt like hell. I could hear people screaming and dying from the shaft as we climbed out. Then it got quiet. I hid us under a pile of clothes in the laundry room. I could hear footsteps stomping through the house, and I remained silent and still. They subsided, and still I stayed. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I was afraid. A few times while we waited there, it got very quiet, and then the noise would start again. Sometimes it was very close to the laundry room, and I expected to have to try to fight for our lives at any moment. Then it would get quiet for a while, but I was still afraid to move. Finally, I heard footsteps moving around the building again. It seemed to me that there was only one person making them. I was sure he sent the thrushes away and came back to look for us, or to listen when the building got quiet. He really wanted to kill Patience. As footsteps approached where we were, I heard Prudence calling my name and called out to her. Prudence helped me with Patience, and we got out of the building. All right. Prudence put us in her car and then went back into the building to see if she could find anyone else who needed help. She told me that if anyone showed up, we had to get out of there. I was so afraid he was still there and would find her or us. A few minutes later, she came back with Myron and we got the hell out of there. What took you so long to get here? I asked. I had no idea where Prudence was taking us, Penance replied. I was just glad we got out of there. None of us are from around here. Our home is in Boston. I thought Prudence got lost for a while because we drove in circles. Her car doesn't have much range before she has to plug it in. Luckily, she let it charge while she was at the convent. And then we just showed up here. I drove in circles because I had to make sure he wasn't following us, Prudence said. After that, I rode around and waited for the first sign of the sun in the sky. The only thing they get right in the movies is that they can't stand sunlight. Then Prudence looked at me, and as usual when we looked at each other, it was as if something passed between us. I didn't want to risk his following me here, she said. This is exactly where you should have come, Prue, I said. Even if that bastard was right behind you. Penance looked at us and tilted her head slightly. She raised one eyebrow and held her breath to say something when Myron walked into the room. I've made contact, he announced cheerfully. We've been ordered back to Boston. All we have to do is get to the airport. We have to contact the local bishop and arrange transportation. That nightmare is finished, blessed Lord. Patience should not be transported until she's been examined by a medical professional who can determine how serious her back injury is, I said. And you, Penance, should immobilize your arm to make sure you don't do any more damage to it. I don't need help from a human, she hissed. And for your information, I don't really like the way you... Everyone must have been on edge, because while Penance was talking, the doorbell rang, and that was enough to send everyone into a panic. I looked out the peephole and saw my nurse friend Janice. Janice walked in, and I introduced her to everyone. She examined Patience first. She said Patience needed to have x-rays and an MRI. Judging from the fact that she had severe weakness in her legs in addition to the pain, Janice suspected that one of her spinal discs was pressing on a nerve and preventing it from sending impulses throughout her lower body. Surgery might be required, and moving her to a sitting position could do even more damage. She offered to take patients to the hospital by ambulance. Next, she examined Penance's shoulder and asked me to help her put it back into the socket. Penance screamed so loudly she must have been heard in Boston, but felt great relief when the pain went away. Janice put a bandage on her arm and told her not to use it until she could move it without pain. She told her that it would probably take a few weeks. The four of us stood around Patience and told her what was going on. Janice gave her a strong painkiller and we waited to hear from Bishop. Myron called him and relayed Janice's instructions to him. Prudence and Penance were arguing animatedly about something. When the argument was over, Penance came over and spoke to me. "You're not so bad for a man," she said. "Thanks for your help in the alley with the vampire. And thanks for letting us hide out here." You could see she was having a hard time saying that. I just nodded as she walked away. But at the last moment, she turned back to me. "Just so you know, I could have beaten you," she said. I laughed as she walked away and sat down next to Patience to wait for the ambulance. Prudence came over and sat next to me. "Jason," she said, "I may have the answer to your problem." "What problem?" I asked. "I've talked to several senior priests, and they know of a ritual that can free your wife from vampire control," she said. "That's wonderful," I purred. "Yes," she said sadly. "You can get her back and try to save your marriage." "It can't be saved," I said. "I just wanted her back so I could legally cut her out of my life. I need a fresh start. I just need to get rid of all the old stuff before I do that." Just as I noticed a smile appear on Prudence's face, I felt her hand grab mine between us. From across the room came the second loudest scream I heard that day. "What are you trying to do to her?" Penance shouted. "Penance, leave them alone," said Patience. "No, Patience," Penance shouted. Her Irish accent was getting thicker with anger. "Can't you see that? He's holding her in his arms. He calls her Prue and has been looking at her with cow eyes since we got here. I've known her for 6 years and I don't call her anything other than Prudence or sister, and he's already calling her Prue and she's eating it up. What were they doing before we got here? I'm telling you, it's wrong." "What's wrong is that we'll have to take her with us to Boston," Prudence said, as if Penance hadn't even spoken. I nodded and told her to do whatever was necessary to save her. The ambulance came, and I went downstairs to let them in. With them was a bishop I had met before, when Terry and I were first married. He said a prayer over Terry, who was asleep, and then the ambulance technicians, who obviously worked at the church, gave Terry an injection to put her to sleep for the trip to Boston. As they were carrying Terry to the ambulance, Prudence stopped me in the hallway. "Jason, what did you mean when you said I had to come here even if the vampire was right behind me?" she asked. "I already told you that you're always welcome here," I replied. "I saw Penance trying to listen to us and she was seething." "Jason, there are no lies between us," Prudence said. "Prue, if you were in trouble or fighting for your life, whatever it was, I would have to be there fighting with you," I said. "Jason, she began. But before she could utter a word, Penance grabbed her arm and dragged her away from me. "Goodbye, Jason," Prudence said, as Penance pulled her into the car. I stood in the doorway and watched the cars drive away. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't get her out of my head. I told myself all the logical things. I tried to convince myself she was a nun. Nothing I told myself helped. I was tossing and turning in bed, wondering what was going to happen and if everything was going to be okay. Just as I began to ponder the secret process that would free Terry from vampire control, the phone rang. I looked around and noticed it was starting to get dark again. I walked over and picked up the phone. It was the bishop. "Hello, sir," I said. "Are you calling to let me know that Terry is okay?" "Actually, I'm calling you for something else," he said. I hesitated for a moment, and then another voice came through the receiver. "Hello, man," she said. "Let me speak to Sister Prudence." "Prue isn't here, Penance," I said angrily. "But she should be," Penance said. "She took your wife and all her weapons and—" "Oh, shit," I said. "She went after him. We assumed that once it got dark, the vampiress would try to summon Terry again. Why the hell didn't she take me with her?" Even as I spoke, I was getting dressed. I could hear Penance moving around in the background. "Penance? I'm going after her. I'll call you when I find her," I said. "No, I'm coming with you," she said. "Pick me up at the church your wife goes to." I wasn't in the mood to argue, so I didn't. The church was down the road. I figured the vampire would return to the spot where we'd seen him. If I was wrong, Prue would be dead, and I couldn't deal with that. I pulled up in front of the church. My Mustang was breathing fire and letting everyone in the neighborhood know we were here. "We can't drive this car, it's too loud," Penance said. "We'll take Prudence's car." Apparently, the Almighty was watching over us that night and did something to me. I got in that car, the Chevy, and I didn't complain. I knew I'd have to shower a few times after it was over to wash the Chevy smell off me, but all I cared about was getting to Prue before she got hurt. I had to admit that Penance was right. Prue's car was much quieter, and in this case that might come in handy. Penance and I were reluctant allies. We made up for the sake of saving someone we both cared about. After a few awkward silences, we both began to speak at the same time. "What did you do to Sister Prudence?" she asked. "If you guys do it all the time, why the hell didn't you prepare better?" I asked. "We rarely come across something this powerful," she hissed. "I didn't do anything to her," I said at the same time. "You know she went after that thing to protect you, right?" she said. "What are you talking about, you crazy woman?" I asked. "Think about it," she hissed. "We'll be out of here in a few hours. We just have to wait for the private jet to be sent for us." But she hesitated. "The most damage to that monster was done by Patience with the crossbow bolt and you. That thing is furious and out for revenge, or maybe it's just an animal and defends itself on instinct. If Patience wasn't around, she'd go after you, you fool." For some reason, Sister Prudence found this distasteful. Just before sunset, when she left, she had a very strange look on her face. Your wife sat up straight, even with all the drugs in her system, and tried to go outside. The Volt moved through the early evening almost as quietly as a whisper. The only sound it made was the sound of tires rolling over the ground. For a guy who loved the sound of 8 pistons in a synchronized mechanical symphony, it was scary. I kept repeating 2 things to myself over and over again. I alternated them in my mind. God wants you to drive this piece of shit. You're doing it for Prudence. "Do you love your wife, man?" she asked abruptly. "No," I answered honestly. "I did love once, but she betrayed me. It's all in the past now." "Patience thinks you love Prudence now," she hissed. "She also thinks Prudence loves you. You know that won't work. She'll lose all her powers and turn into a common nun if you soil her. You should also know that Sister Prudence lied to you. She told you that there was a process to save your wife. There is not. She just needed to use her as bait to save you. Why did you stop?" "We're here?" said I. "Maybe you should stay in the car. You won't be much use with one arm." She didn't bother to answer. She just rolled her eyes at me like I was crazy. I turned behind the bar into the alley we'd fought in the night before. The electric car was running silently, but it didn't matter. We were late. I jumped out of the car, followed by Penance, just in time to see a vampire walking across the alley with a limp Prudence in one arm. "Hey, you bastard!" I shouted. "If she's hurt—" He just looked at me and bared his fangs, hissing like a huge shaggy cat. I lunged at him, followed by Penance, holding a mace in one hand. I picked up another stone and threw it at him as I shortened the distance. He snatched the stone out of the air and slapped it on the ground beside him, then bared his fangs again. I think that was his way of letting me know that I couldn't get him like that again. He tossed Prudence like she was a sack of potatoes and then made a gesture. Out of the darkness, 3 big homeless guys rushed at Penance and me. We disposed of them very quickly. Penance only had one arm, so she brought her mace down on the head of one of them. I took my golden Oriole katana with me. I decided that if I was to die, let my favorite sword be in my hands. I lunged forward. My blow hit him in the heart and immediately knocked him back. I ducked and then hit the other guy in the right leg. No matter what the vampire wanted from him, if he couldn't walk, he couldn't get to me. It was funny, but this time, with Prue in danger, I didn't care about morals. I ducked just in time to avoid being cut by the vampire's claws. As he passed by, I struck him in the torso, but did no damage. It felt like my blade hit metal. As I rolled on the dirt of the alley, I remembered what she said about armor and knew what I had to do. While the vampire was distracted by me, Penance struck him hard in the back with her mace. The impact as well as the suddenness of the blow knocked him off his feet. As I stepped back to attack him again, my foot bumped into something. It was Prue's katana. It was blessed by the church, and according to Penance, all of their weapons were special. I knew exactly what I needed to do. While the vampire tried to get to his feet, I dropped the Oriole and picked up the Prue katana. I thrust the ancient blade in with all my might, trying to get to his heart, piercing through the armor. I grew up reading stories about samurai who did incredible things with their swords. They were supposedly able to cut through anything. Stories of how they could pierce the barrels of cannons with their sharpened blades. I had to do something like that. I was sure God was on my side. I summoned all my strength and with a scream plunged the ancient blade into the creature's chest plate. Like the ancient samurai, I knew I would only get one chance. The blade struck, bent, and then split in two. Obviously, I wasn't a goddamn samurai. To make matters worse, the vampiress hit me. It was only a glancing blow, but I flew through the air backwards and landed in a big pile of stinky dirt. Again, I hoped it was dirt. That was the second time he'd knocked me over on my ass in that alley. I was aching all over, and when the creature turned its back on me, baring its fangs, Penance struck again. This time, he was ready for her. He snatched the mace from her hands with a swing. He threw it across the alley, lunging at her as she backed away in fear. I knew I only had a few seconds to act, and suddenly it was clear to me what I had to do. Penance looked across the alley at me, her eyes full of fear. I got up as fast as I could and ran. I didn't rush into battle. I ran away from Penance and the vampire. God's plan for me suddenly became clear, and I realized why I hadn't been riding my Mustang. Apparently, God likes Mustangs too. I would never be able to do what I needed to do in my car. I climbed into the vault as the vampiress loomed over Penance. She reached into her raincoat, pulled out a .357 Magnum, and fired point blank into the vampire's chest. He somehow dodged the bullet and caught it not in the chest, but in the arm. The vampire was furious and bared his fangs at Penance. He knocked over a trash can and she fired 2 more bullets at him. He jerked from side to side and dodged both bullets. The rattle of the gun at close range blocked out the sounds of me rushing toward him in the silent car. It was only when I reached out and knocked the gun from Penance's nearly paralyzed fingers that he realized something was wrong. He tried to turn around to see what was going on, but the 3,781 pounds of the nearly silent electric car sealed him into the wall. I got out of the car, a little staggered on my feet, but fully aware of what was happening. I reached out and raised my sword. "When I saw you running, I thought you were leaving me," Penance said. "I would never leave Prue," I said. "Check her out." When I approached the vamp, he howled in pain. I could see he was trying to summon his slave girls, but it didn't help him. He tried to rest his hands on the hood of the car to push himself off the wall and free himself. Even as I watched him, his legs seemed to begin to heal. But it was too late, I thought. I took up a position behind him. I wanted that punch to count. He was trying to peek over my shoulder to see what I was doing while I was getting ready. "See ya," I said as the blade sizzled through the air. It was a difficult blow, not as easy as the movies make it seem, but this time, I was flawless. Terry raised her head as if she too had finally woken up. She looked around confused. Penance and I were kneeling next to Prue. I wanted so badly to kiss her, but I knew Penance would destroy me if I did. I was shaking so badly that I staggered and swayed, trying to stay on my feet. Prudence opened her beautiful eyes and looked at us. "I couldn't stop him," she muttered. "He's too strong. I had a plan, but it didn't work. I had to try to save Jason." "I know, honey," I said. "You thought you could break through the breastplate he wears and run your blade through his heart. You got that idea when Patience scared him to death by hitting him with a crossbow bolt." "Where is he?" she asked. "Probably in the 3rd ring of hell," I said. "He's worm fodder." "Penance, did you catch him?" she asked. "It wasn't me," she said. "But I helped. He destroyed it, but I really could have done it if I'd known cheating was allowed. And you, boy, you're going to be pissed. He broke all your stuff. He wrecked your car and broke your sword." Prudence tried to stand up and looked at Penance with a shocked expression on her face. "Sister Penance, did you just say freaked out?" she asked. "Good nuns, especially Sisters of Destiny, don't use expressions like that." We walked out of the alley, Terry following us. Prudence leaned against me and held my hand. Penance kept looking at us. We went back to the church and told Penance and the bishop what had happened. Everyone was glad the nightmare was over. With the vamp dead, everything except my marriage could go back to normal. Everyone seemed oblivious to the looks flitting between Prudence and me. They also seemed resigned to the fact that we often touched each other and held hands. We spent the whole night together, as they had no intention of leaving until morning. The next day, Prudence and Penance, who didn't want to leave us alone for a second, drove me home. My heart was breaking as she said goodbye to me. "For the first time in as long as I can remember, my heart is being torn in two," she said. "Jason, I've never, ever felt for anyone the way I feel for you. I wish I didn't have to leave." "God, just do it," Penance said. The plane is waiting. We're flying home. I've turned my back. I can't see anything, so just do it already. Do what? I asked. This, she said. And before my cat reflexes kicked in, she kissed me. She kissed me and made me go weak in the knees. Now I know what love is, Jason Grant, she said, turned and left me standing on the threshold. Wait a minute, I said. I ran into the house and back to her. I shoved a tube into her hands. She opened the lid and smiled. What's this for? She asked. As a memento of me, I said. It's certainly not a 300-year-old katana consecrated by the church, but hell, the blade won't break in half like yours. Think of me when you kill someone with it. And by the way, I know what love is too. 3 days later, I sat down with Terry to have a rational discussion about our divorce. She tried the old ploy. I'm Catholic. I can't get a divorce. I showed her my papers that the church had annulled our marriage as soon as we got a civil divorce. She tore them up and stuck them in her purse. I told her they were just copies and I had many others. She refused to see a lawyer. I tried several times to get her to see a lawyer, but no one could find her. It wasn't a problem for me. I moved on with my life. I removed her name from all my accounts and canceled our joint credit cards. Her name was never on the mortgage, and I changed all the locks. I took all of her belongings and took them to her parents' house. I didn't object to the divorce. I wasn't going to get married again at that time. How could I? I was in love with a nun. Watching the kids have birthday parties in my neighborhood and looking at their costumes, I wondered how many of those ghosts and goblins they pretended to be actually existed. Hell, they probably all existed. 3 days before, I didn't believe in vampires. Epilogue. So, you want to divorce my daughter because she was attacked by a vampire? Terry's father asked. That's just not fair. It looked like he really didn't believe me. No, sir, I said. I know that all the shit that happened with the vampire wasn't her fault. That kind of thing can easily carry people with weak minds or unable to resist temptation. I want to divorce Terry because she cheated on me with 4 different guys before she ran into the vampire. Jason, she went through a year of therapy. She's a completely different woman now. Can't you give her another chance? Besides, your nun friend is back to hunting monsters. You shouldn't be alone. And I don't think there's anyone who loves you as much as Terry does. I only smiled. God works in inscrutable ways, I said. I've been very busy over the last year. Only the first few weeks were very interesting. Once I got over the fact that Terry was in hiding and wouldn't give me a divorce, I decided to tie up some loose ends. I sent a copy of that video and pictures to the wife of Nick Jones, the guy Crystal was cheating with. She was so angry that she divorced him and took all the money he had. She named Crystal in the divorce suit, and naturally Ed found out about it and divorced Crystal too. I thought you gave Crystal your word, he began. I did, I said, and I kept it. I told Crystal I wouldn't tell Ed. I never said someone else couldn't tell him. I considered it poetic justice. After all, Crystal had helped destroy my marriage, so it was only right that she should too. I was sitting at the dining room table polishing my new gold Oriole that I bought on eBay to replace the one I gave Prudence when someone knocked on my door. I opened the door, and there she stood. Her skin was gone, and she was wearing a white blouse and a dark skirt. That's the kind of clothes nuns wear when they're out of the habit. Sister Prudence, I said, smiling. I'm just Prudence now, she said. I was released from the Sisters of Destiny. But why? I asked in shock. Sisters of Destiny are raised from an early age to serve the church, she said. They must remain pure and untouched, and because of that, they have special gifts of speed and strength. I lost my abilities because I was tainted. But we never did anything but one innocent kiss, I said. Jason, that kiss wasn't so innocent on my part, she said. Besides, that wasn't the point. As soon as I got back, they noticed the scratch on my neck from the vampire. Perhaps it was that touch of evil that caused me to lose my powers. Since I was tainted with evil, it was decided that I could no longer serve. I was tried to be assigned to 3 different convents where I would serve as a regular nun. In none of them did I stay longer than a few days. Mostly because when they found out what I was doing at my previous duty station, most of them became afraid of me. She looked down. That must be hard, I said. The people you've served most of your life have turned their backs on you. It must be really awful to be betrayed by the people you love. I suppose you and I have that in common too. You were betrayed by the church, and I was betrayed by my cheating wife. She nodded and smiled a bright smile. Wait a minute, I said. Penance and I examined you right after I killed the vampire. There were no scratches or bites on you, and it wouldn't have mattered. When we killed the vamp, his stain was gone. I know, she smiled. I made the scratch myself in the bathroom with a pin. I told you I was tearing up. But now I have nowhere to go. I remember someone told me I was always welcome. I need someone to teach me the vicious ways of the secular world. Wait a minute, Terry said. You mean that woman gave up on you? And now she's living with you in my house? I nodded. Screw you, Jason. I'm still not giving you a divorce so you can marry someone else. I came here today to see if you've come to your senses so we can be together again. Come on, Dad, let's get out of here. Terry, we're already divorced. I filed for divorce 6 months ago. Tomorrow on Halloween it will be final. You'll be gone for a year. I just smiled. Screw you, Jason, she said angrily again. Then she looked oddly at something that must have been behind my back. I knew from the fingers that began to lightly rub my shoulders that it had to be a nearly 6-foot-tall, golden-haired goddess in a Dunkin' Donuts uniform. That's my job, Terry, Prudence said. Huh? Terry said, moving away as her father looked at Prudence and started shaking his head. Damn, Jason, that's my job now. As Terry and her father backed away and walked out of the cafeteria, Prudence sat down at the table. Jason, I heard your divorce is final, she said. That's good. Oh, Patience and Penance will stop by tomorrow, he said. It's been a year, and I guess they want to check on how I'm doing. They're bringing their new partner, Petey. What does this have to do with my divorce? I asked. Nothing, honey, she replied. But divorce is a good thing, because today I discovered that all those lecherous things you've been making me do seem to have worked. We're going to have to get married. Prue, really? I began. And she nodded. We, not me, are having a baby boy. I think it's going to be a girl. Penance is going to destroy me, I laughed. The end. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.